Glad you're with us for another edition of Big Noon Kickoff, the offseason. And boy, a lot to get to. Urban, Joel, Reggie, and Matt will join us in a moment to talk about the implications of the Big Ten and the Pac-12 backing out of football for the fall, what the spring season may or may not look like, and what the Big 12, ACC, and SEC are going to do going forward. But first, let's get some questions answered by our college football insider, Bruce Feldman, who has been all over the college football landscape the last couple of days, particularly yesterday. And Bruce, Tuesday was full of disappointment, anger, emotion. Wednesday, obviously, some of that still lingers because of the news that came out of the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. But also, it's time to start moving on and forecasting what football is really going to look like in the fall, in the winter, and in the spring. First things first, why the decision by the Big Ten and the Pac-12 to call off football this fall?
Rob, on late last week, I think the Big Ten ADs started to feel very, very concerned. They were getting reports from their medical experts that were very disturbing to them. And similarly, in the Pac-12, on Monday night, the Pac-12 ADs, their coaches, Commissioner Larry Scott, were briefed by their medical experts. And it was some of the same stuff from the Big Ten that they had been hearing. Numerous players in the Big Ten they worried had heart issues stemming from COVID. On top of that, they referenced a Red Sox pitcher who also has been dealing with that. And so in the last really couple of weeks, according to Doug Ackerman, he's the chair of the Pac-12 Medical Advisory Committee, he had told me just really in the last couple of weeks, it has been something where they have become increasingly concerned about that issue. On top of it, there were testing issues that they said they did not feel very comfortable with. In order for some of the Pac-12 schools that are in hotspot areas, both USC and UCLA among them, they felt like they would have needed to ramp up testing daily. And so some of those things, they just did not feel comfortable enough and said it was not realistic for us to go forward. And that's why they both made the decision that they did on Tuesday.
So, Bruce, what differentiates the Pac-12 and the Big Ten from the other three major conferences that are electing to go on, the ACC, the SEC, and today, obviously, the Big 12 announcing that they're going to continue and their schedule? So what are those two conferences seeing that those other three conferences aren't?
That's a great question. I mean, I posed that to people who are the medical experts, and they say, listen, everybody has had their own interpretation and who's in their ear and who they're listening to. And I think one of the challenges that the folks in the SEC look at, and I don't think it's that different maybe from other places, but they felt like they had a better handle on things after about a month of dealing with their college football programs, acclimating and really learning about, okay, we need to take this very seriously. What they worry about is what happens when the regular students come back on campus and they expect a surge. Those are the concerns that they have. But at the same time, now the Big 12 today announced several things they're going to further implement in terms of to address the heart issues concern, whether it's echocardiograms, cardiac MRIs for players who test positive, and also those requirements would be on the non-conference opponents that they're going to play in the first, on the 12th or on the 19th, now that they've rolled out their schedules.
The fear of the unknown, the fear of litigation, you feel weighing very heavily on the Big Ten and the Pac-12. Some other concerns about those two conferences, losing their players and losing upcoming recruiting wars. Look, you and I are not naive to think that there's no negative recruiting going out there in the best of circumstances. Now, even more so, what is the fear factor inside these Pac-12, these Big Ten programs, as far as losing their current players and losing recruits?
I think the recruiting piece is really big right now. And that's something that has already got a lot of traction, to be honest, with some of the chatter that is in the ear of some high school coaches as well as some recruits. The part about guys having a mass exodus and transferring from these two conferences, or even the Mountain West and the MAC have already shut down, one of the challenges that they would face, and this is something that has been an issue even with some top FCS players that I've heard from, is if you transfer, you're going to have to go in and learn a new system. You are going to have to acclimate to new teammates. There's a safety component about whether you could transfer into a new environment. And for some guys who are top players, I think they worry about, I may have put bad film out there because I'm thrown into a less than ideal situation. And you could do all those things, and still prepare to say, hey, I'm gonna talk to these other schools and think about leaving. And then you get there and they may be shutting down. So it's a really, really complicated, fluid mess that I think is really hard for, especially at the core, for a lot of these players who found out their seasons are over before they began, after they have really sacrificed a lot, not just on the football field, but in terms of doing all the things above and beyond what their coaches have told them would be required if they were going to have a chance to play.
And then there's the NFL component to these conversations as well. We'll get into that a little bit later when the rest of the guys join the conversation. So, Bruce, as we stand here on Wednesday, 77 of 130 FBS programs are moving on with college football, are going to play. The conferences, we've talked about the Big 12 today, confirming they're going to continue playing. The SEC, the ACC, the Sun Belt, the AAC, and the Conference USA are the conferences essentially that are moving forward. So what does the college football landscape look like? And that includes playoffs and bowl games this fall.
I think it's from the Power Five who's going to be left standing. I'm sure the AAC and their commissioner, Michael Resko, are going to push to say, hey, we deserve to step up and get a seat at the table. But I've had these conversations with coaches in the SEC and the Big 12 already about, hey, what does this mean for a national champion? And the informal answer is, if you win your conference, it could be like the old days where if you look through, like Ole Miss has claimed like a bunch of national titles back with things that people have never heard about as the ones awarding them. You could have some element of that. Now, I know the CFP is going to have to weigh in on this, but even how their formula is, we're in such uncharted waters with this, Rob. How people put schedules together and everything else. I think that answer, much like a lot of the other stuff right now, is totally TBD.
Interesting dynamic that's come to the forefront over the last couple of days is the chatter out of Nebraska and Scott Frost and his AD pleading that, yes, we want to play, our players want to play. And then the conversation has turned to, we want to continue to play. We want to find a place for us to play. So is there an option for Nebraska to play football this fall from what you've learned?
It's dicey right now, Rob, because it's a very turbulent relationship between Nebraska being so outspoken and the Big Ten. Now, remember, not that long ago, Nebraska was flexing its muscle as the king of its conference back in those Big 8 days. And then it was kind of a little bit of a turf war with Texas in the Big 12, and now it's in the Big 10. It doesn't have the history with the conference that Michigan and Ohio State certainly do. And so their public stances and pushback is one thing. On top of that, Bob Bowlesby talked about that this morning, the commissioner of the Big 12, and he said there has been no contact with Nebraska at this point. But if they were going to make that move and try to finesse a move, say, hey, we're going to play and we're going to piece together a schedule, even though there are no spots right now, right? Because the non-conference games have already been structured in. I don't know how they would shoehorn that in. And on the back end, I can't imagine the Big Ten would welcome them back after making such an end-around move.
All right, so as of now, there is fall football. And as of now, there's this heavy conversation. And Gene Smith, the AD at Ohio State, said, I need to move on from the disappointment of Tuesday and move forward to the positive of spring football starting. And there's a lot of different conversations out there. Barry Alvarez has talked about it. He mentioned that Paul Chryst has had to deal with coaching in the spring and then coaching in the fall. And one of the big key words there is condensing the schedule. So if you had to kind of give us a blueprint on the loose boundaries maybe of what spring football could potentially look like for the Big Ten and the Pac-12, and who knows if anybody else wants to join them in that, I can't imagine, but what do you think spring football would be looking like?
Well, I think they would have to have a condensed season. Ryan Day spoke this morning and talked about an 8-game schedule. I know Jeff Brom from Purdue has really given this a lot of thought, and I would expect in the next day or two he will put out a more detailed look at what he thinks is the best plan to make it work. I want to go back maybe earlier in the pandemic. We had reported at The Athletic that Lincoln Riley had done a lot of research and put this plan out and his ideas on a conference call with his peers in the Big 12. And from talking to several of those coaches, they felt like it was a very convincing argument he made. Now, there's certainly challenges. The biggest challenge is from the wear and tear on college athletes. I mean, if you have an 8-game schedule, then what happens on the back end? You push back the fall season of 2021. How long is that season going to be? I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to be sorted out. I wouldn't be as concerned about the weather issues that have come up, because I think you'll hear from people in the Big Ten say, you know what, there's a lot of games that are played in bad weather in the NFL and they make it work. I also think that for all the skepticism of people say, you know what, you're going to lose you would lose the Trevor Lawrences, you would lose the Justin Fields and the guys who were projected as top 50 picks. I don't think that would be a reason for them, the conference, if it's doable, if they think it's healthy enough for them to try it, for them to say, hey, we're going to pass up playing college football anywhere in the 2021 academic calendar. Because remember, they'd also be giving up hundreds of millions of dollars by not playing at all.
Real quick, I just want to throw this concept by you. The bubble has had a lot of success in Major League Soccer, in NBA. And has there been any discussion about a Big Ten bubble, if you will? Just a quick snapshot. Obviously, indoor stadiums in Minneapolis, Indianapolis, Detroit, places that obviously are in that Big Ten landscape.
The challenge with that, and I asked one of the medical experts this, was you'd have to have a bubble for all your athletes. And it's so many more athletes than what you're talking. I mean, do you only have a bubble for college football athletes and not for college basketball, women's basketball, and all sorts of the other sports that go under that umbrella? Because that was my question to them this morning. On top of that, Rob, I think what you'll see in the SEC and probably the Big 12 and the ACC is tacit understanding of, hey, don't go on campus unless you have to. Take all your online classes online if you can. This is about the best way we can have a bubble in the fall to try to manage this as best possible.
Bruce, I can only imagine how many texts and phone calls you received over the course of this interview, and the
half of them are from Leinart.
The fact that you now have a fake Twitter account out there sending out information lets you know how important you are to us and to everybody in the college football landscape. Bruce, thank you for all the insight and the continued work. And my guess is in the next 24 hours, so much is going to change. Bruce Feldman, thank you as always. And let's take you through how much has changed over the course of, let's just say, the 8 days as we eye the schedule. Of course, August 5th, University of Connecticut, UConn became that first FBS team to say we are canceling our football season for 2020. A couple days later, the MAC became the first FBS conference to say we are going to postpone in the fall and move things hopefully to the spring. August 11th, on Tuesday, Big Ten, Pac-12 postponing their football season. And then today, Big 12 announcing they are going to continue scheduling for the 2020 fall season. All right, to carry on the conversation, we bring in once again Urban Meyer, Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart, and Joel Klatt. All right, I know you guys were all angry, frustrated, disappointed. You can add all the adjectives yesterday. And Urban, I'll start with you. I'm curious, where do you sit now, having digested the news of the Big Ten and the Pac-12 pushing off their fall season? 24 hours it's been sitting in you. Have you calmed down at all?
Oh, I've calmed down, and this really doesn't impact me. My heart is broken for these young people that have a shelf life of college football, and it is a very small, tight window that you can perform. And I've heard from a bunch of families, and I think I've heard Gene say it, Gene Smith, and I tried to put myself. When I was first hired at Ohio State, I took the job with the intent that we could go to bowl games. I was told there's not going to be any probation, no loss of scholarship. Gene Smith walks in and says they took 9 scholarships. No bowl game this year. I remember it was like someone hit me right in the jaw. I got knocked out, and I sat down for a second. And then all of us have a job to do. Go do your job. Ryan Day, Gene Smith, go do your job. Do what the best you all can for the most important people on the planet right now, and those players that just had everything ripped away from them. And that's going to be Ryan Day is swinging as hard as I don't know what that means, but he's just swing as hard as you can for players. If that means spring ball, spring ball. If that means help them get to the NFL, help them get to the NFL. But we all have a job to do, and that's the approach that I know the great coaches are going to take, and ADs.
Reggie, you applauded this decision. Why?
Well, I thought it was the right decision because we still don't know the long-term effects of what COVID is. And on top of that, we don't have a cure yet. Like, we don't have a vaccine for this thing yet. And so it's not, the athletes that we're so much worried about, because we know that they're going to be healthy and be taken care of, but they can still get it, and they can be super carriers, and can pass it to some of the coaches who may not be in as good of a shape as some of these young athletes. And then how's that going to affect them? Because we can't have coaches dying, during the season or being, drastically affected. And then there's the other portion of it too, is the testing. My former quarterback, Matthew Stafford, had a false positive test. And so what if that happens during the season? A guy tests positive, it's a big game, and, comes out a couple days later after the game and they lose, that he should have been playing the whole time. And so there's so many different variables that we just don't know, the element of the unknown, on top of the fact that, let me repeat this, we don't have a vaccine yet that's readily available to us. So we got to look out in the best interest of the players, because at the end of the day, the players are the primary stakeholders in this sport.
Joel, are they looking out for the best interests of the players?
Well, I think that they're trying to, and I think that they're probably doing the best job that they possibly can. That these decisions do reek of avoiding liability, right? I mean, I think that we at least have to acknowledge that that's part of this decision, because COVID is not specific to football. You can, and you could maybe make an argument for these players that it's more likely that they would contract the virus outside of the structure of football in the normal course of being a student on campus. And we'll see all of those students come back to campuses across the country here in the next week or so. I think Ohio State's welcoming 40,000 kids back to campus, maybe even today. So just to give you an example. So I think that with that in mind, these decisions were more born out of the fact that the presidents don't want to be tied to the contraction of the virus versus, getting the virus outside of their control. And then obviously the heart condition, and we haven't brought that up, myocarditis. And myocarditis has been around for a long time. And so the research that's being done right now needs to decipher whether it's more prevalent with COVID positive patients, or if it is the same in terms of prevalence of what we've seen of viruses in the past. Because again, this has been around for a long time. Athletes have dealt with it for a long time. And so we need to get these answers. And to Reggie's point, we just don't know some of those answers. And I think that's what led to these decisions, was the liability, the unknown of the heart issue. And then last thing, Rob, is that I'm just concerned, right? Because these decisions, we act like, well, this is just avoiding the catastrophe for the student athlete, but there are catastrophes around the corner when they're outside of the structure of football. Coach will tell you the most worrisome time in a coach's life is when he doesn't have control of his players. Right when spring ball ends, or when you send them home for the bowl game and you don't have the structure of football and accountability around them, that's when kids get into trouble, get into the wrong things. And unfortunately, in this case, because football has been ripped away from them, could be dealing with the deterioration of their mental health. So there's a lot of things that we've got to be aware for, and ultimately, as Coach said, keep swinging and keep fighting for these players, regardless of if they're on the field competing or not. We need to be aware of what they're dealing with, continue to test them, continue to try to keep them safe. So that their health and safety is being looked after even without football contests going on.
But Joe, why do they have to leave? Why do they have to leave the university or under the structure just because they're not playing football? They can still stay in a structured program that they can build for these young kids right now. Like you kind of alluded to earlier. This time period, it's going to be very important to see how some of these universities handle this, because again, I don't believe players need to leave the university just because they're not playing football. They can still get that same great health care, while they're there.
And listen, I agree with you. And Ohio State has even come out with a statement, Coach, I know that they're going to continue to test players, continue to offer 20 hours a week of being in their care. And that is a great thing. And Reggie, those are huge positives in the wake of something that is a big negative, right? Now, I think it would be naive of us to think that there is an unlimited source of money that you can, without the product of the football game, continue to care for these student athletes indefinitely, right? So the budgets will get contracted to a point where you're starting to make decisions of how often are they going to be tested? Are you going to have EKGs and cardio whatever they are, the cardiac MRIs available for these kids if they're dealing with myocarditis? So again, we just have to be aware. I'm not suggesting that they're going to be thrown out into the normal population, but I do know without the resources available that football games provide, that decisions and cuts are going to have to be made.
Mm-hmm. Barry Alvarez, the athletic director at Wisconsin, yesterday, he already said, quote, there will be layoffs. So the financial ramifications, and that's just not on campuses. That's all the feeder people that deal with college football. The television networks are going to be taking a hit for sure, and the people that cover it. Matt, I want to get your reaction. Justin Fields on Twitter yesterday just sent out an SMH, shaking my head. And I know you were shaking your head and had been shaking your head leading up into this news. Where are you right now with it?
Kind of the same. I think, we all, Joel, Reggie and I played the game, coach played and coached these kids. And if you try and put yourself in that mindset, which is really difficult, I don't know how, I've tried, I'm thinking like, wow, like, I don't know, I would be so disappointed. And to Coach's point earlier on, it's just, the people really don't know the work that goes into being a student athlete, not just a football player, but a student athlete. But especially when we're talking about football all the time and, the dream of playing for your college program. And, like Coach said, the shelf life of football players in general might just be college and that's it. And to have that taken away because of this pandemic, which obviously we just, no one has been able to control, my heart breaks for these kids because football has given us all so much, and it may not give you money, it may not get you the NFL, but it builds you friendships and it teaches you life lessons and all of those things. And it really teaches you how to become a young man in those college years. So, I'm sad for them. And to Joel's point too, and this has been an argument all over the last couple of days. And I know to Reggie's point as well, but I do, we as a student athlete, as a college football player, you base your whole schedule around your football schedule, your academic schedule, everything. And, a lot of us at the age of 18, 19, 20, maybe we're able to make really smart decisions and, you stay out of trouble. But when you don't have that umbrella of that schedule of just your training and your meals and your rehab and, your practice and your meeting and your film and all that, because we all know we are routine based. Football players are routine based. That's what makes me really nervous about this. And Joel's point, concern for the mental health of these players, man. It is I can't fathom. Again, I think now it's there's a lot of questions moving forward, and but some of those guys like Justin Fields and some of these players have some decisions to make that are unfortunate coming up here pretty shortly.
You mentioned moving forward. So let's move forward to what college football is going to look like on the field, what the landscape is going to be. We're going to get back to the Big Ten and the Pac-12 in a moment and talk about what spring may or may not look like. But let's talk about the teams that are playing football right now. And the Big 12 came out with big news. And to me, I saw the Big 12 as a tipping point. If they said, we're not going to return to college football in the fall, to me, I could see that being that domino that maybe dragged the SEC and the ACC in with them. However, Big 12 saying we're going. So 3 of the 5 Power 5 conferences are playing football, Joel Klatt. So what does college football look like this fall? Again, very few programs are going to have the out-of-conference games. And then the big question, are we going to have playoffs? Do we really need, or will we have a national champion this year?
Yeah, who knows, right? I think we're back into this state of, what was it, pre-football bowl alliance, was it, Coach? When we used to just say, okay, play the season, and then the UPI poll would come out, and the AP poll would come out, and the coaches poll would come out, and you'd have 3 different national champions. We might be back into that scenario. It's really hard to picture what this is going to look like. All of these schedules are very much kind of conference only. I know the Big 12 is going to play a non-conference game, but I think that the name of the game right now is going to be patience. I think more than anything else, rather than a flag in the ground from those 3 conferences as saying we are going to play college football, was just, we're not going to make a decision now. And I think that was the important point. I don't think it's set in stone that we're going to see college football this fall. And I think it's pending more research and evidence surrounding myocarditis, right? This heart condition ultimately has become the #1 topic within college athletics. And the more that we know about it will determine whether the ACC, SEC, or Big 12 play. And then as it relates to the playoff, who knows? I think that they'll probably try. I've heard some within college football talk about moving the college national championship all the way back to the week before the Super Bowl, and that off week that the NFL play takes between their championship game and their Super Bowl. So they might want to give themselves some runway for the conferences that do play in the fall and potentially still have the playoff. And again, they might need that playoff to get some of the revenue back that they're sure to lose during the course of everything that's going on monetarily.
Reg, how does it look this fall?
It's going to look crazy. That's how it's going to look, because you got 3 out of the Power 5 teams still trying to play football, which is absolutely insane. I have friends, coaches who are in the NFL right now who have tested positive for COVID because he got it from the players, right? And then we've seen half of the Miami Marlins team tested positive. It was just a couple weeks ago. Like, we have athletes and people testing positive, and they're still trying to say we're going forward. That makes no sense to me. I don't understand that. But I think what we're seeing is, one, lack of uniformity with all the Power 5, the whole Power 5 conference. We're seeing one side is saying one thing, another side is saying the other thing. At the end of the day, these universities still want to make money. Players do want to play, and I don't think anybody's wrong for that, right? I don't think anybody's wrong for wanting to play college football. I want to see college football happen. And if I was in college football right now as a junior, senior, I would want to play too. The selfish side of me would probably want to play. But I think at the end of the day, none of us are doctors, right? And what are the doctors saying, right? What are the doctors who are on TV saying? They're still saying social distance. Football is not a social distancing sport. I don't know why, for the life of me, people don't understand that. This sport is built on tackling, hitting, up close and personal. That's what football is. You cannot do a social distancing football game. That doesn't make sense, and that would never happen. So until we figure out how to do that, I just don't believe that we're going to see football this season. I think these 3 conferences that are still kind of flexing their muscles and saying we're going to move forward are eventually going to have to succumb to not playing football.
The lack of uniformity, Reg, I love that phrase, because I think that's something that makes us all tense up and kind of get clenched right now, because it is frustrating. Yeah. There is not that one universal voice, Urban, that's coming down and saying, hey, we're making this decision. We're all in this together. Is this that proverbial tipping point in collegiate athletics, in college football, where the system that it is right now gets blown up or certainly gets disrupted, and a new, stronger, greater force comes? It is now the time to change things up, Urban.
Well, obviously, it's never been closer. I just can't see a situation where that takes place. You're talking about as competitive environment that exists on the planet right now. You're talking at Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia. The conferences could care less about what the other conferences do. They poach teams from each other about television contracts and revenue. So I don't see that happening. And the only thing when Reggie was saying that, the guy that is really, to me, is a shining star is Greg Sankey right now. Greg Sankey is saying, press pause. Let's take a deep breath. You're talking about starting the season 6 weeks from now. Take your time, take a deep breath. What's going to change? I don't know. It's changing every day. There's more and more information being done. And I sent him a text the other day and saying, wow, I just admire your leadership. Just take a deep breath. Does that mean they're playing on September 25th? It's not September 25th. It's August 12th or whatever it is. So press and pause would have made more sense to me, is just keep gathering data. Right now, Ohio State, and I saw what Jim Harbaugh put out, you're talking about the safest environments arguably on the planet within an athletic team. I can tell you what Ohio State does, because I see it. I can't tell you exactly, but I look at the numbers, and you can't say there's a safer environment around for a student athlete, for a human being to be. And if they're not positive and they're out there playing, I guess I have the hard time. Why is Notre Dame, are their doctors different than Ohio State's? Or I shouldn't say Ohio State, because I know how Ohio State's doctors feel. They wanted to play.
So should there be one governing body, though? One health voice talking down to everybody and saying, let's follow these guidelines?
Yeah, I think that sounds logical. I don't see that happening.
Why do we have to throw out logic right now? This whole year is going to have an asterisk next to it. Why not change things that are wrong? I mean, unless you think the college football system, the way it is good right now, Urban, and it is great. We love it, but you know better than all of us the flaws that are inherently inside it. This seems like a great time to try and hit that button and change some of these.
First of all, I'm so old school. I don't think college football is good. I think it's great. I think it's the greatest thing out there. You know, I hear about racial issues. I hear about just issues across our country. I'm telling you, for 35 years, none, zero. It was all about team, all about your teammate. It was about fighting a greater good. It was about education. It was about life after education. It was about love of. I know that sounds so old school, and some people don't even comprehend that anymore. So the old college football, I loved it. It was the greatest thing in the world. It was you and your team, and go play someone else in front of a big crowd, cheer each other on, hug each other, cry, and then go do it again and again and again. I'm so sick and tired of hearing about all the problems. You know what? It was great. It was better than great. We have people on the screen here that flourished in it and are living great lives because of it. So I get very passionate about that. My kids are better off because they play sports. Quit messing around with it. Yeah, I'm getting exhausted with it. So yeah, do we need to change everything? You need to reform, but to say blow it up, what are you talking about? Go blow up the things with issues. So that's my thoughts.
Hey,
Rob,
Coach,
I love getting Urban fired up.
I love getting Urban fired up, and I think it would be important to note that, you know, because of the autonomy of each individual conference, there would have to be an incentive structure for them to walk away from that and enter into some sort of agreement, right? You've heard me talk about like the point between the Revolutionary War and the Constitutional Convention in our country's history, right? Where there was an incentive structure for the states to actually band together and get a federal government so that they could become, candidly, a better market system for international trade and so on and so forth. And there was also this equality under the law type of a deal. But I don't see the incentive structure there to disband the current model, because no one's going to the table and saying you're going to make more money by disbanding the current model, right? All of it would just be in theory. Hey, in theory, would it be better if we had one medical advisory board? Yeah. Reggie, you would agree with that. I would agree with that. Matt would agree with that. Coach would agree with that. I would love to hear one voice that everyone got behind from a medical standpoint. But right now, that's just not the case.
But just wait a minute, Joel. So just put yourself. So let's let the government get involved. Look how our government's being. It's a mess. You know.
I'm not saying the government should get involved. I'm just saying like one overarching body.
They can't even agree on the national level.
I agree.
Listen, we just hired a guy in the government that says don't wear masks. Another guy says wear masks. So I don't want to hear this utopia, because guess what, boys? The utopia does not exist. To me, the closest utopia was the most incredible meritocracy that existed, college sports. And I don't want to, well, that's better off this way. Tell me again, who's better than college sports? Yeah, you know what? This is a mess. I got news. It's a mess across the planet right now. It's called COVID. It's uncharted waters. So let's blow up the old college football. What are you talking about? No, the whole society is a mess right now because of this. Keep going, keep pushing. I think people are overreacting. Take a pause, press pause, and go. But you can't tell me, well, we need one overall board. Well, tell me where that is in our country. We don't, in the great country, you have Fauci and then someone else disagrees with them constantly. So that doesn't exist, Joel.
Yeah, listen, I'm not disagreeing with that fact. I think that's a frustration for all of us in every facet of our lives, is that it doesn't seem like we can get cohesive medical advice for this novice virus, and it's magnified right now with it. Well, I'm certainly not. I think that you're putting words in my mouth. I'm not blaming college football. I'm saying that I think a lot of people within the sport, athletic directors in particular, and maybe even some of the players, would welcome a more cohesive medical voice. Now, if that doesn't exist, then that doesn't exist. But trust me, if Justin Fields and his teammates are watching Trevor Lawrence and his teammates compete in the fall, guess what they'd be desperate for? Their medical advice versus the medical advice that the Big Ten got, right? So I'm telling you, like, I'm agreeing with you, right? I'm not saying that we should blow up the model. I'm just saying that this model is frustrating, as it is in every walk of our life.
It's a microcosm of our society right now. We hear what we want to hear, and we push away what we don't want to hear. And it's frustrating. I'm with you. Coach, we love college football. We love, maybe not as much as you love it, but we're pretty damn close, my friend. So we're not looking to blow it up. We're just looking to make it better, make it finer. So I'm going to do one quick poll question, just to show of hands. Do we have a college football playoff this fall? Show of hands. I'm not seeing any hands. A soft one. Reggie's shaking the red headphones. No. Matt? No.
I still think
no. Okay. All right. That's interesting. Then it kind of comes up. Well, then what? I don't know. All right. Let's go to spring. All right. Let's go to spring. And Matt, you get first dibs because the Pac-12 is saying we're not even going to have any type of student athlete interaction on a surface as far as games being played until the end of the calendar year 2020. So nothing. That includes the basketballs and everybody else into 2021. So what are the benefits of having a spring football season for college campuses and college athletes?
Well, I mean, look, we talked about this on the show a few weeks ago, and I don't want to say I'm a proponent for spring football, but I think at this point it is clearly the only option for the Big Ten and the Pac-12 and potentially the other 3 Power 5 conferences. Look, I think obviously the financial impact will be huge to absorb some of the loss that's occurring now and will occur throughout the fall. But I also think, like we talked about, and Coach is just so passionate about football in general and just playing the game that these kids love. So playing the game, I mean, that's the positive impact. And I know it's not ideal. And this whole argument we just had, nothing is ideal. We are in a pandemic that no one knew was coming, and no one knows how to respond to. There is no guarantee that all the same questions are going to be answered 4 months from now. There's no guarantee of that. But a spring football season, no matter how it's shaped, and again, there's going to be dozens of different proposals go out probably in the next couple of weeks and months. I think it would be great because it's the only option left. And I want to see, selfishly, like Reggie said, I want to see players play the sport that they went to college to play. I want to see them. I want to see games. I want to, the sport that I love. So I think spring is viable. I think it can happen. I think there's obstacles, but that's what now these two conferences for now have months to prepare for. And let's hope that they get it right this time. If there is the rapid testing, if there is what Joel said, the cardiac MRIs, if they are more available at that time and the cases do drop, let's have a plan in place and then move forward and you figure it out. But I think it's viable, and I think at this point it's the only option.
Reg and Joel, I want to get to you guys in a moment about the NFL implications of what spring football would be. But Urban, I want to swing it to you, and I got a couple lines I want to tee you up with. Yesterday, I listened to you on the Big Ten Network, and you were asked about your notion on playing spring ball, and I wrote down, quote, "no chance," and you were pretty angry about that. But I know you've had further discussions, including with Ryan Day, and again, Ryan Day, the head coach at Ohio State, today threw out an 8 to 9 game schedule with a postseason and end things before the NFL draft. Remember, the NFL draft can be pushed back into June. But your thoughts on what value there is, and if or there shouldn't be a spring season for the Big Ten and the Pac-12?
Yeah, I apologize. Sometimes I get so emotional because I'm knee deep in this. I'm probably too close to the situation of when you have one of your former players you recruited and got to know so closely sobbing on the phone and what do I do? I mean, you're bordering on despair for some people. And I get very upset when I hear people say, well, it's just a game, or, wait a minute now. You're not giving enough credit to these young people to sink their lives into this thing. So I'm very emotional about it. And I did talk to Coach Day, who had a great team. He did. And I have the other thing, not one player that I'm aware of in that organization did anything wrong. As a matter of fact, they did everything right. And you had it taken from you. It's something when something happens and you make a mistake and all that. But I just hate the fact when I see people lose things and they did nothing wrong. And so conversation was about January, February, March. As much as I don't see a spring practice happening, if you did it in January, my biggest thing, Rob, is, and I made it clear, is how do put someone's body through two seasons in one calendar year. I don't see that happening. Ryan Day is working very diligently on it as we speak, as is James Franklin and some other coaches, and everybody's fighting as hard as they can for that student athlete to get, if it's 5 games, 10 games, whatever it is, because there's guys, first of all, you want to win. You want to showcase your skill set. When you start talking about Ohio State and the Penn States, et cetera, even all schools, you have a handful of players. That's their chance to go earn a living, to go do this and get rewarded for this incredible efforts they've given over the years. So will that help them, and will they play? I'm going to wait and listen. I'm very skeptical. If it was later in spring, I'd say no chance, because that's not fair to them. If it's very early spring, I want to hear the model, because that's what's being worked on right now.
Hey, Coach, I do think mistakes were made, though. I think mistakes were made by our leadership, and whoever we want to, say that leadership is it the president of the NCAA, Mark Emmert? Is it the commissioners? Because we knew about this a long time ago. They canceled March Madness before it even started. So the NCAA already knew about this. This had already been a big thing. And how big is March Madness getting canceled, right? So that's at the beginning of March. Here we are in the middle of August, still trying to figure out a plan, still trying to figure out how we got here, still trying to figure out how did this happen. But it comes from leadership and the lack thereof, and that we did not have. And it has to go back to the NCAA, because, again, like I said, they canceled March Madness in the beginning, so you knew there was a problem. You knew there was something to address, and you knew that there was something college ball that we needed to fix.
The spring issue. The spring issue is tough. Coach, I agree with you. I think that it would have to start as close to Jan 1 as possible, in order to feasibly put a college football player's body through a season. And again, I think it would have to be reduced, probably somewhere under the 9-game threshold, maybe 8 max, guys, if you're talking about games in the spring. But you could get those in before the draft. But remember, that's in a perfect scenario. That's if everything goes right from today until January 1, as far as national COVID numbers, point of care testing becoming more prevalent so that they can get results within hours and not days. The prevalence of the myocarditis evidence and all the care that goes on with that. So if everything goes perfect, I think that you would have to have a spring season that started very close to Jan 1, which means that you're going to have camp in December. So it'll be very interesting to see if those advances come, and then if they can get a schedule put together that has some flexibility within it and can work, that is as quick as possible in the spring, because the later it goes, you're just going to lose out. And then the other part of this, and Coach, I know this is a huge part of what a coach would be thinking about, is what does your roster construction look like at that point? You're going to have kids that graduate early and come to school. Are they eligible for that season? If you have a kid that decides to declare, does that open up a scholarship spot? Are scholarships going to increase? Do they decrease? There's so many questions as far as roster construction. I know that that's like the 150th hurdle in a 200 hurdle race for spring football, but certainly all concerns that you're going to have to start talking about right now.
I think I'm going to propose, for Reggie and because I know your body took a toll as a running back and coach, you dealt with spring practice, but I think, when you look at playing 2 seasons in a calendar year, and obviously both probably modified next year, when you look at the NFL plays 16 games, 4 preseason games, obviously not this year. That's 20 games. And then if you get to a Super Bowl with Reggie won 1, we got to 1, that's an additional, 3-4 games. You're playing 23, 24 games at the highest physical level in the NFL. And that happens every single year. A spring to spring season, spring football, which obviously wouldn't be the wear and tear as a 8 to 9 game actual football season, but you are hitting, you are tackling, you're playing a spring game, you're in full pads, whatever coach it is, 12 to 15 practices. You do that in spring, you play season, then you do your Clemson, Alabama, your season ends January 13th or 15th. And, less than 2 months later, you're already back in spring football again, hitting again. So I think just to ask you guys, and maybe Coach, you'd have a better answer, is just like, it is doable. Is it ideal? No. And that's why I do think if you started in a perfect world, Joel, to early January, and you end by, April, when you look at it that way, what these bodies already go through, and the fact that these are young kids healing faster and quicker and all that, I would just ask you that. I mean, if you look at it that way, I do think it's possible.
I think anything's possible. I think a lot of things have to go right? Like, we put it on. What's going to change in December that we don't know now? I don't know, because things are changing constantly. Hopefully it changes for the better. But Matt, I think the possibility, if it's possible, we need to exhaust those opportunities, which is part of the frustration that we're having this discussion, is because all they had to do was delay the start of the season in order to allow for more runway to exhaust the options even for this fall. I just vehemently disagree with these presidents and Commissioner Warren that they had to make this decision now versus the quality leadership from Greg Sankey out of the SEC, who was patient. So to your point, Matt, I hope that we have the patience necessary to look at a spring season, because it is very important, I think, in order to play football, for the mental health of the player, for the opportunity that they present. Because remember now, in particular, men's non-revenue sports, they are on the chopping block. Scholarship opportunities for young men and young women across the country in every sport are on the table right now. Tens of thousands of them. Remember, the NCAA has 150,000 scholarship athletes. That's going to be reduced, period. Okay, that is pure and simple opportunity for people to get to higher education, many of whom wouldn't have that opportunity to go to higher education because of the exorbitant costs right now that is tied with going to some of these universities if you're paying for tuition. So we've got to figure it out. If it's possible, we got to figure it out.
What I think the answer is, after just listening to Joel talk, Reggie and Matt and Rob, is that we need time. We need space. Is this going to be different in January? It's going to be much different in January. It might be different everybody. If you look at the science, what's been done in these incredible athletic organizations is better than what's been done anywhere on the planet right now. You're being confined. They were getting 0 positive tests back with 17 to 22-year-olds. Think about that for a second. So it's been an overwhelming success in a lot of places. And you look what's happening. If we would have pushed this back to September 25th, and guess what? You get 3 weeks out, push it back some more.
Yeah.
Push it back some more. Okay, we can't go 10 games. Let's go 8 games. Okay, in the meantime, keep working on a January, February season. Don't panic. Keep pushing it back. Keep pushing it back. And in the meantime, the student athletes are still getting trained. They're still under the umbrella, like Reggie said. You're getting tested twice a week, and I know that's money's going to run out at some point. But you're still working with players. You know what they did? Ohio State, go home. Everybody, now, what does that mean? Go home. You're going to go home to some environment where it's not like it is in the facility of the Woody Hayes Center, where there's not testing, and you're just putting yourself in harm's way. So I'm like Joel. Just why now? Why did we make that decision yesterday? Keep pushing it back, and letting this thing breathe, because there's a lot of very talented scientists and doctors working on this thing 24/7.
Push it back as long as plans are being put in place for when you kick the can into January and you kick it into February. And okay, we've hit this calendar date that now puts Plan B into effect. I think that's the worry with all of us and the student athletes out there. Nobody knows what the plan is.
Excuse me, Rob. What's the biggest negative? And I told my son's playing college football, and my message to him, hey pal, worry about practice. That's not your job. There's guys that are PhDs that are working on this. You hang in there, keep going. You know what? You have the job to do. You get to be the best version of yourself every day. That's your only focus. If they tell you the season's going to be back 2 more weeks, move it back 2 more weeks and keep going. But in the meantime, young people are still getting trained. They're still on campus. They're still taking online classes, and they're still going.
Let's try to end on a positive note. Coach, you had a great day on the golf course today. Joel Klatt, you're seconds away from moving into your 1,500 home in Southern California. Reggie Bush is still Reggie Bush. That's a great day. And Matt Leinart, you got that beautiful baby's eyes to look into. And how about this? I'm going half full here, guys. I get it. But I get college football in the fall, and I get college football in the spring. That makes me kind of a happy guy. All right. It's not ideal. We get it. But it makes me all right. College football is still going to be around. It's still going to be one of the greatest sports out there, and it's going to be played in the fall. And guys,
I appreciate that sentiment, Rob Stone. Well done, sir.
I'm here for you, man. I'm here for you. Long live college football.
The best thing you said. The best thing you said. Hey, Reggie Bush, you're still Reggie Bush.
That's right. That's right.
You know I'm not wrong. You know I'm not wrong. Love all of you guys. We'll see you again next week.
I love it.
You guys.